Okay, today is an episode about an investigative journalist, and started working in Kentucky and Ohio. Won a bunch of awards for investigative writing, a bunch of like really high prestigious awards. He's best known for the Dark Alliance series that appeared in the Mercury News in 1996 that looked at the origins of the crack epidemic in Los Angeles, claimed that members of the anti-communist Contra rebels in Nicaragua played a major role in creating the drug trade, and used the cocaine profits to finance their fight against the government in Nicaragua. Also stated that the Contras might have acted with knowledge and protection of the Central Intelligence Agency, and that article series provoked a lot of outrage, particularly in Los Angeles, and particularly in the African American community, because that's who it primarily affected at the time, and led to 4 major investigations of that, of the claims in that article. So we're going to talk about this particular investigative journalist, whose name is Gary Webb. And you're listening to Country Roads Creeps.
Man, you didn't let me do it with you.
Okay, try it again.
You have to say this is. That's my cue.
Okay, this is
Country Roads Creeps.
Oh boy. It's been a hot minute since...
It's actually been ages. It's been ages and ages.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why. We've recorded this episode once before.
We recorded this episode. And
and then what happened?
And our machine stopped.
22 minutes in.
Yeah.
To the hour-long episode we recorded.
Yeah.
But the good news is, it's been so long since that happened that I forgot the entire story that you're about to tell. So it's like
that's good.
Fresh. And then we had so many other things happening that just prevented us from getting back to re-record it.
Both of our schedules have been really busy.
Yeah. Like
particularly
you had events you had to do, and you got sick one time, and then I had family visiting and something else. It's just been insane. But we're back. We're going to do this one again. The first time we tried to record it, I told you that I messed up on, I don't even remember what episode it was anymore at this point, but we were talking about Walton Goggins.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you said his name, and I said, I think it's Walter. And you're like, oh, I was wrong. It is Walton Goggins. You were correct. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's all.
Sorry, I was wrong.
I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Shane's been practicing saying that to me.
Yeah. To my chagrin. Yeah, it's been busy.
It's been great. Yeah. One of my students asked me, do you have any new episodes out?
Yeah.
Sorry
for...
It's so sweet. We're trying.
Sorry for the delay. It's our fault.
Completely.
And like, I don't know. It's, you know what I always wonder is like, when there's a podcast or something, like people interview other people, and there's like maybe like a little bit of a controversy surrounding an interview or whatever. And they're like, oh, we had this guest on, they posted the picture, and then later they're like, we lost the footage. It's like, sorry, we had technical difficulties, we lost the footage. It's like, you've done 300 episodes and you've never lost footage.
Yeah.
And this particular one that everybody wanted to hear the controversy and the drama, you lost the footage. That's suspicious. And it's like, no, maybe, maybe
their machine quit recording 22 minutes in.
There's been a couple of times that we've had technical difficulties. Yeah. And the first time was our machine stopped, and it saved up to the point we had already done the bulk of the content for the episode, and we were just yapping at the end.
Yeah, so it wasn't like a huge loss.
Yeah. And
this
so
time,
when we did the
it was
outro,
a huge loss.
Yeah. So
yeah, the other times we noticed it before it was like too far gone. This past time, we seriously talked for an hour and didn't notice that it wasn't recording until we finished. And then we were like, that is really unfortunate.
Yeah. And there is a fix for this that exists that I'll tell you off recording.
Okay.
And won't spoil it for everybody else. But
okay. Well, I'm excited to hear this story again. Because like I said, I don't remember it.
Yeah,
just because I have
as we go through it, it'll probably start coming back to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you have mom brain, so I
can't remember anything ever at all anymore, and it's fine. Yeah. I just have to write everything down. We're adapting.
Anyway, has anything happened in the last 6 weeks since we were?
I don't know. Can't remember.
Oh, good. Me neither. So I won a competition, shooting competition.
Good.
And I lost another one. So
not good.
I did.
Balanced out.
I went to Virginia, which I have won in Virginia a couple of times in the last couple of years. Did better performance than I ever have, ever. And by the way, like, so when I say that, I mean I've done worse and came in first place and second place. Better than I ever have performed. Came in 11th. It's extremely competitive this year.
Oh yeah.
For some odd reason.
Yeah.
Like people's names I don't recognize. So
coming for you.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm missing another one today specifically to record this. So good for me.
Thank you for coming. Yeah. Making the sacrifice.
Yeah, thanks for
so we can get back on track here.
Yeah. It's also the thing is since we're so late on this, I was going to try to release this slightly sooner within the next day or two of recording
that's fine
this.
With me.
And then we'll be back on track with our normal schedule, I guess. Mm-hmm. So
all right.
Anyway,
let's get to it.
Episode time. Little backstory on the Iran-Contra and Reagan and all this stuff. We covered it in another episode. So, and I'm pretty sure it was the Charles Morgan episode. So if you want to hear like the more details, go listen to that. But basically, this whole Iran-Contra thing happened where the Reagan administration and previous administrations and all this stuff was going on, and they tried to they sold weapons to Iranian arms dealers who were funneling them into South America, and then they were funding they were using that money that they were making off of selling them to Iranian arms dealers that, well, not just South America, but they were going other places as well because they're Iranian weapons dealers, but they don't really care who they sell to, I guess. But they're funneling them all over the world, all these weapons to all these different terror groups and rebel groups and stuff. So there was some investigation that I think also showed that they ended up funding the Contras as well, but or the Contra rebels or whatever, but whatever you want to call them. But anyway, the United States used taxpayer money to have these weapons, I guess, and then they sold them to Iran, and then Iran gave them money. That way it couldn't be traced back to the United States giving the money to the Nicaraguan rebels to overthrow the communist regime in Nicaragua. So that's bad. That's regime change. There's also this thing, because when we recorded this before, a few weeks ago, a lot of this news was happening about the USAID stuff. Turns out, and what the claim is, that USAID funds a lot of the programs that are too dirty for the CIA. And so, as it turns out, it's under the cover of like USAID, but they're actually funding a lot of regime change stuff in parts of the world that people have never heard of, like, and couldn't imagine what's going on. So, like, as part of the investigations go on, like what we found out is that like 95% of the money that's supposed to go to like feeding orphans in Africa and giving them school books actually doesn't do that. Yeah. So some of that money does, because they have to, so they can prove that it goes to this stuff. Most of it is like there's contractors that are in place that are like, yeah, this is our money. We're actually going to go give it to this warlord guy who has these slaves, but he's a nicer slave guy than the current dictator that they have in this area. So,
oh my gosh,
like, and he more aligns with the United States because we actually don't like this terror group, and they're fighting the terror group, and we can't fight that terror group because people would be mad about that. So we're just going to give them guns.
I don't know what to say to that.
Evidently, that's what's going on 9 times out of 10 with this USAID stuff, which is bad. So, whatever. But or maybe it's good. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I can even have an opinion on that because it's like so down the rabbit hole of like geopolitical activities that like
Complex.
is so complex. It's like if you really got to like if you actually talk to one of the guys who's doing that stuff, it's like, so we have to do this so that this thing doesn't happen. So it sucks that we have to fund this proxy war between these two rebel groups. But if we didn't, then like, you know, something else bad would happen or whatever. So I don't know. And also like one of these interviews I saw is that like China is also doing this and so is Russia. So I'm going to get to this a little bit more at the end because there's one particular thing that I was going to mention regarding specifically China and Iran and Russia, the current day stuff. But anyway, wait 50 minutes and I'll get into it. So Los Angeles Times and other major papers publish articles about this Dark Alliance series that Gary Webb wrote. And they claim that the stuff in the articles were overstated. And in November of 1996, Jerome Sepos, the executive editor at Mercury News, wrote about being, quote, in the eye of the storm because of all of this stuff, swirling controversy and all of this. In May 1997, after an internal review, Seppo stated that although the story was correct on most of the important points, there were some shortcomings in the writing and the editing and the production of the series, and wrote that the series likely oversimplified the crack epidemic in America and supposed the critical role of the dealers written about in the series were not... They weren't as involved with like the CIA and stuff as what the series claimed. Mm-hmm. Gary Webb disagreed, so he wrote it and
called him out.
Yeah, and this is my propaganda episode, so I'm going to say what I want.
Oh my gosh, that's a crazy statement.
So, Webb ended up resigning from Mercury News in 1997, became an investigator for California State Legislature, and then published a book based on the Dark Alliance series in 1998. Did a bunch of freelance investigator reporting, and then he passed away in 2004. So we'll get into some of his life in a little bit more detail now, but
okay.
The first thing that I kind of, oh my gosh.
Can you hit do not disturb? You're popular today.
Yeah. It's my girlfriend.
Your girlfriend.
Sending me Instagram reels.
Your girlfriend.
Quit that.
She's the best. I love her.
Mm-hmm. Hannah's just saying that because she listens to the podcast.
No, she is so nice. She sent me a video to watch about Amelia Earhart's possible plane under the ocean that we talked about.
Yeah.
I haven't got a chance to watch it yet because everything's been insane as we discussed, but I've got it saved and I'm excited. And I thought that was really nice of her to find that and send it to me. Thank you.
Oh, you think she's nice?
I do.
Well, so the Dark Alliance series is controversial, stays controversial. There's critics of the series that claim it's inaccurate and overstated. Supporters would point to the results of a later CIA investigation as pretty much admitting to everything that they did. The follow-up reporting in the Los Angeles Times and other papers was criticized for focusing on problems in the series rather than re-examining the earlier CIA Contra claims. So it's more like, well, I'll get into it in a little bit more detail later on and say exactly like the current analogy, which is particularly annoying, but basically it's like the recent news stuff. It's like anytime there's a quote unquote conspiracy going on, it seems like, especially when it's a true one, the news fact checkers or whoever will come in and be like, actually, this is false. And then you read the fact check and it's like, he wasn't wearing a red tie, he was wearing a blue tie when he like, and it's like, so, but it's true. Like the conspiracy part is true. You just Actually, he didn't fly on Air Force One. He flew on the Marine One, the helicopter. And it's like,
but what they did was true.
Okay, but whatever. So
the details matter.
Yeah. But then what happens is like people read the fact check headline and it's like, actually this is false, and
I
they're
just
like,
assume the whole thing of it is false.
So and what's also especially annoying is whenever the fact checkers come in and they're like, this is false, and then later, like 2 years down the road when it doesn't matter anymore, they put out another article and they're like, actually, as it turns out, it was true.
But everyone's forgotten about it by then.
Yeah, nobody cares, and they already had their Twitter arguments about it, or sorry, X arguments.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
I think they sold X to somebody else.
The XAI. So Elon sold X to his AI company. He
sold it to his own company.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's this funny shell game that billionaires can play with their money, and people like you and me who don't have any money don't understand. And I watched a video about it, and I still couldn't explain it to you if I wanted to. So anyway, not much interesting on Gary Webb's life. He not special in any kind of way. Like,
that's so mean.
I mean, I'm not.
He's not special in any kind of way.
Not initially is what I'm trying to say. Like, he's just a normal guy.
Okay.
Who got, like, he's an investigative journalist. Nothing like crazy is going on with him. He's a very normal SpongeBob in every sense of the word. And if you saw the picture that I put up on our Facebook page for the episode, it's he like the glasses and the mustache. He looks like a very, like, if you picture somebody from
normal dude,
1990,
your
that's
average
what
Joe.
Gary Webb looks like. But he's very normal until we get to the investigative journalism career. So his first investigative work appeared in 1980. The Cincinnati Post published The Coal Connection, which was a 17-part series by Gary Webb and another Post reporter, Thomas Sheffey. And it examined the murder of a coal company president with ties to organized crime and won the National Investigative Reporters and Editors Award for reporting from small newspapers. It's a pretty good award.
Yeah, that's nice.
In 1983, Webb moved to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, continued doing investigative work, and in 1985, he published a series called Doctoring the Truth, uncovered problems in the state medical board, and led to an Ohio House investigation that resulted in major revisions to the State Medical Practice Act. So he moved to that paper's State House Bureau, where he covered statewide issues, and then won a bunch of awards for journalism there. Whoa.
So he was doing really well for himself.
Then he kind of hit some hiccups. So,
okay.
84, he wrote a story called Driving Off with the Profits, claimed that the promoters of a race in Cleveland paid themselves nearly $1 million from funds that should have gone to the city of Cleveland. That article resulted in a lawsuit against Webb's paper, and the plaintiffs won. So the paper lost. Jury awarded the plaintiffs over $13 million, and the case was later settled.
What did they sue for?
For, I guess, libel or slander or whatever.
Okay.
He wrote an article claiming that they paid themselves millions of dollars from funds that should have gone to the city.
Okay, gotcha.
And they claimed that they couldn't prove in court that they did or didn't. So, in 86, he wrote an article saying that the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Frank D. Celebrezzi, accepted contributions from groups with organized crime connections. Celebrezzi eventually sued the Plain Dealer and won an undisclosed out-of-court settlement. And I guess the thing with that is that, like, he's an investigative journalist. He can write. He's being allowed to, like, basically write whatever he wants to, and investigate whatever he wants to. But if there's no solid proof that somebody did something and he writes about it, then that person could sue. So
yeah,
exactly like this Supreme Court judge is like, well, I'm not taking I'm not taking I'm not taking organized crime money like this investigative journalist is claiming.
Oh, yeah.
So, and you can't prove it, even if he was or wasn't. So, in 1988, Webb was recruited to the San Jose Mercury News that was looking for an investigative reporter. He was assigned to the Sacramento Bureau, and he was allowed to basically choose most of his stories again. As part of the Mercury News team, she covered the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. Webb and his colleague Pete Carey wrote a story examining the causes of the collapse of the Cypress Street Viaduct. And basically this double-decker freeway kind of thing that fell down during this earthquake. They won the Pulitzer Prize for general news reporting in 1990.
Nice.
So the design of this double-decker freeway thing wasn't able to survive the earthquake because upper portions of the exterior columns were not tied to the lower columns by sufficient reinforcing. And so, then they said they weren't sufficiently ringed to prevent bursting.
It's really scary.
I don't really know what that means. I'm not a structural engineer, but basically these kind of structures, the double-decker freeways they weren't analyzed as a whole. They were analyzed as like the top part and the lower part separately. And so it appears that large structure motion contributed to the collapse because now they're not now that they're stacked on top of each other, they act completely differently. So then they would.
That's really scary.
Yeah.
But that wasn't looked at all together.
They say that there was some kind of local game or something going on, like some local team was playing, and so a bunch of people either stayed late or still in town watching the game, and so during that time they would have been on the road, and it would have killed a lot more people than it actually did. Webb started researching the Dark Alliance series in July of 1995. It was published in the Mercury News in 3 parts. From Sunday, the 18th of August in 96 to the 20th of August in 1996. First with a long article and then 2 shorter articles appearing each day after. The lead section of the first article, set out the basic claims, quote, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Drug ring opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, and as a result, the cocaine that floated in helped spark the crack explosion in urban America," end quote. So that's the basic claim that we have here. Pretty substantial claim about the government's involvement in completely ruining an entire community, just to fund.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah.
Probably won't be the last.
Definitely. So to show this evidence, I guess, the article focused on 3 particular men, Freeway Ricky Ross, which people have probably heard of. He's a big famous guy, drug guy, I guess. And then Oscar Danilo Blandon and Norwin Meneses. Ross, like I said, major drug dealer in Los Angeles, but Blandon and Meneses were Nicaraguans who smuggled drugs in the United States and supplied drug dealers like Ricky Ross. After introducing those 3 people, the first article discussed primarily Blandon and Meneses and their relationship with the Contras and the CIA, and much of the article highlighted the failure of law enforcement agencies to successfully prosecute them, and stated it was largely due to their Contra and CIA connections. Second article described Blandon's background, how he started smuggling cocaine to support the Contras. Meneses was established as a smuggler, and he was a Contra supporter, but he taught Blandon how to smuggle and provided him with cocaine. When Freeway Ricky Ross discovered the market for crack in Los Angeles, he started buying up the cocaine from both of those guys. And high volume supply of low priced, high purity cocaine allowed Ricky Ross to set up the Los Angeles market and then move on. So this would eventually spread city after city. And it started in LA, but it would go all across America pretty rapidly as well. The third article discussed the social effects of the crack trade. Nothing surprising here, honestly. Like all the stuff that we kind of know about crack cocaine had a particularly bad effect on the African American community at the time, and they referred to that Blandon guy as the Johnny Appleseed of crack in California.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Kind of comical.
Yeah, in a dark, depressing way.
But they started looking at the arrests of the black and white traffickers in the system, contrasting the treatment of Blandon and Ross after their arrests for drug trafficking. Because Blandon cooperated with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, he only spent 28 months in prison and then became a paid government informant and received permanent resident status. But Freeway Ricky Ross also cooperated with the investigation, but he was rearrested a few months later in a sting operation arranged with Blandon's paid informancy help. So the article suggested that was in retribution for Ross's testimony in the corruption case. But after the publication of Dark Alliance, Mercury News continued to pursue the story and publish follow-ups for the next 3 months. Other papers were slow to pick up the story, but because African Americans pretty quickly took note of the stories, especially in South Central Los Angeles, where the dealers had been active, they were pretty outraged by the series' claims. Even California Senators Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein took note and wrote to the CIA Director John Deutsch and U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno asking for investigations into the article's allegations. Maxine Waters was a representative for California's 35th District, which includes South Central Los Angeles. Also outraged by the articles, became one of Webb's strongest supporters, and Maxine Waters urged the CIA and the U.S. Department of Justice and the House Permanent Select Committee she urged the CIA and the Department of Justice and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to investigate that article. Jeez.
Good job.
The government agencies are such a mouthful.
They really are.
By the end of September, 3 federal
Try again. Try again. Sound it out.
By the end of September, 3 federal investigations had been announced. An investigation into the CIA allegations conducted by the CIA Inspector General. An investigation into law enforcement allegations by the Justice Department Inspector General. And a second investigation in the CIA by the House Intelligence Committee. Gary Webb continued reporting on this stuff, and that triggered a fourth investigation. The first article in Dark Alliance discussed the failure of law enforcement agencies to prosecute these drug dealers. But one of these was a 1986 raid on Blandon's drug organization by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and the article suggested had produced evidence that the CIA ties to drug smuggling was later suppressed. And when Webb wrote another story on the raid, Evidence, in early October, it received wide attention in Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department began its own investigation into the Dark Alliance claims. So it wasn't until the federal investigations were announced that other major papers started really reporting on the story. And it mainly seems like they didn't want to report on the story's findings or the claims, but they could by kind of saying, like, here's the claim by this other article, and then the CIA is investigating it, so they could sort of report without being like,
right. So it's not like we're not saying it, but this guy's saying it, and we're bringing it to your attention.
Yeah.
It's from him.
primarily the Los Angeles Times gave the most space to the story, and they wrote 3 articles about it, claimed it was really more of a gang and drug smugglers operation than the CIA and the Contras in Nicaragua that were contributing to the drug smugglers. The involvement with the CIA and the Contras was much less than what Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series claimed it was. They also tried to refute the CIA was protecting drug smugglers, but kind of just misleading since it appears local police had trouble prosecuting and claimed it was because they're connected to intelligence. At least that's my reading of the stuff. It's not explicitly stated to be that clear, but the way I read it, that's exactly what it happened.
Yeah.
So, in response to these articles, Mercury News wrote articles defending the original Dark Alliance series, prompted both LA Times and New York Times to write editorials on that, claiming the original articles made unsubstantiated claims, although they did concede that the Contras were tied to CIA. So, and that there were Contra ties to the drug smuggling and there were CIA ties to the drug smuggling. So they're more so like, it's true, but they didn't substantiate the claims that they were making, is what it looks like.
They don't want to like come back on them?
Well, all major media outlets are in cahoots with intelligence in America.
Yeah, fair.
And there will be a future episode on that. So if you've ever heard of Operation Mockingbird.
I've heard of it from you.
Yeah. So they decided that there were problems with several parts of the story and wrote a draft article incorporating some findings. Some of these reporters at Mercury News, and they gave Gary Webb permission to visit Central America again to get more evidence. And by January, Webb filed drafts for 4 more articles based on his trip, but the editors concluded that they wouldn't help shore up any of the original series claims. So they met with him several times, decided not to print either of the other editors' drafts or Gary Webb's drafts. And Webb was allowed to keep working on the story and made one more trip to Nicaragua in March. At the end of March, Seppos told Webb that he was going to present internal review findings in a column. And after discussions with Webb, the column was published. In the column, Seppos defended parts of the article, writing that it had solidly documented that the drug ring described in the series did have connections with the Contras and did sell large quantities of cocaine in inner city Los Angeles. But he wrote that the series, quote, did not meet our standards in 4 areas. And number 1, it presented only one interpretation of conflicting evidence, and in one case, did not include information that contradicted the central assertion of the series. And 2, the series' estimate of the money involved was presented as fact instead of an estimate. Number 3, the series oversimplified how the crack epidemic grew. And number 4, the series created impressions that were open to misinterpretation through imprecise language and graphics. Seppos did note that Gary Webb did not agree with any of the conclusions. He concluded...
he did not agree with any of the conclusions?
Yeah.
Okay.
But Seppos said that, he said, I believe we fell short at every step in our process, in the writing, the editing, and the production of our work.
Good.
Several people here share that burden, but ultimately the responsibility was and is mine. So basically he should have caught the stuff at the time. And I think more so has a lot more to do with like this stuff had backlash and then he looked at it. And so now he has to like take responsibility for it versus like at the time, like maybe he just wanted to put out this controversial story and like be like, Gary Webb is the man, which he is. So Gary Webb disagreed, resigned in November of 1997. The Justice Department released a report almost a year later. They finished it in December of 1997, but didn't want to risk the investigation with this Blandon dude since he was acting as a federal informant for some time. Major point of their report states that the facts presented in the article are major exaggerations of the true details. The Inspector General Office released the CIA's report finding no wrongdoing as usual. Basically, the CIA investigated the CIA.
And
we didn't do anything wrong.
That's how it goes.
basically no one in the CIA or connected to the CIA was connected to Blandon or Meneses or the Contras, except we know from the Iran-Contra investigation that they were connected to the Contras. So, also no information that the CIA impeded on local law enforcement investigation or prosecutions, except for that we know because the sheriff's department said they interfered with our investigation and our prosecution. House committee released their findings in 2000 at the same time, and the same thing. None of the drug traffickers or the Contras were associated with the CIA, and the CIA didn't impede any investigations, except they did. So, Gary Webb released articles in the form of a book called Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion, where he defended the series and included his refutations of the other articles. That was released in 1998, and to be clear, that House committee report also included that book in the contents of their review of the information. So Gary Webb went on to do some interviews and made some statements, mainly defending his Dark Alliance series and book. He described the controversy as media manipulation because basically the government and primarily the CIA, I guess, were using the New York Times and the LA Times as other outlets as mouthpieces to throw jabs at his work. It looks a lot better than the government just coming out themselves and saying, nuh-uh.
Yeah.
But anyway, he said on this one statement to the Mighty Wurlitzer Plays On, which I think is a radio show. Anyway, he says, if we had met 5 years ago, you wouldn't have found a more staunch defender of the newspaper industry than me. And then I wrote some stories that made me realize how sadly misplaced my bliss had been. The reason I enjoyed such smooth sailing for so long hadn't been, as I assumed, because I was careful and diligent and good at my job. The truth was that in all those years, I hadn't written anything important enough to suppress. End quote. So, they, or sorry, not a radio show. I guess they are a publication or something. But so they wrote on Webb that he believed there was an active collusion between the press and the powerful to report freely on inconsequential matters, but when it comes to the real down and dirty stuff, we begin to see the limits of our freedoms. And he also stated the series had presented dangerous ideas by suggesting crimes of the state had been committed. Basically, the federal government bore some responsibility, even if it's indirect, for the flood of crack that coursed through the black neighborhoods in the 1980s. He would write later on, Gary Webb would write later on, that he never believed and never wrote that there was a grand CIA conspiracy behind the crack plague. The CIA couldn't even mine a harbor without getting its trench coat stuck in its fly.
Oh my gosh.
Except for that he did say that. Anyway, it kind of seems like he's walking back a lot of his claims.
Yeah, but it's published, right?
Yeah.
He did it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's published twice because he wrote a book about it, defending it.
Yeah. You can't really, there's no take backs on that one.
Yeah, kind of seems like he's walking back a lot. Probably because at this time he had a hard time getting hired by other publications and couldn't hold down many long-term positions anywhere. His assignments included investigating racial profiling by the California Highway Patrol in charges that the Oracle Corporation had received a no-bid contract award of $95 million in 2001. While working at the legislature, Webb continued to do freelance investigative reporting, sometimes based on his investigative work. For example, he wrote an article regarding racial profiling and traffic stops, which appeared in the 1999 edition of Esquire magazine. And later moved to the State Assembly's Office of Majority Services and was laid off in February 2004 when Assembly member Fabian Nunez was elected Speaker. August 2004, he joined the Sacramento News and Review, an alternative weekly newspaper, which I think is a nice way of saying tabloid.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he continued doing investigative work. One of his last articles examined America's Army, a video game designed by the United States Army. As at this point, I have good news about Gary Webb and bad news. Which would you like first?
The bad.
Okay, I'm going to give you the good news first.
Why?
He received the most prestigious award that you can receive as an investigative journalist in 2004.
Which is, what was it?
He was found dead in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
Shane.
And it was ruled suicide.
What an insane way to introduce that fact.
That's the bad news.
That's That was crazy.
That's the common joke is the most prestigious award you can receive as an investigative journalist is being killed by the CIA, which he was.
Okay. That's a crazy way to put that.
He was found.
You said like the back of his head and they said it was suicide per usual.
2 shots to the back of the head. Death row of suicide by the Sacramento County Coroner's Office.
Love to do that.
According to a description of his injuries, he shot himself twice with a .38 revolver, which was placed near his right ear. The first shot went through his face and exited his left cheek, and the coroner's staff
You're not doing it again after that. You're not doing another shot after that. That's crazy.
The coroner's staff concluded a second shot hit an artery. Here's the thing about multiple gunshot wounds is that if it was like a smaller caliber, like a 22 or a 25 auto, maybe. Because here recently, there was a guy who got shot in the back of the head by his 4-year-old with a 22 rifle locally to us. No. And he sort of got hit, got out of his car. He was clearly disoriented, but I think he walked into the emergency room or something. So
far away from my mic. That's insanity. Yeah. And he lived?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
A miracle.
But so these small caliber stuff people have been hit before and I think Reagan or somebody, I think it was Reagan was shot. I'm probably wrong on that. I think it was Reagan that was shot with a 25 auto in the ribs or something and lived. Finished a speech or something. Oh. I think that was him. I think he was shot. I think there was another guy, maybe it was Roosevelt or somebody, the tough guy Roosevelt, not the tax guy Roosevelt, that he was shot with a small caliber thing and finished a speech and So anyway, the local newspaper reported that Webb died from multiple gunshot wounds. The coroner's office received so many calls asking about Webb's death that the Sacramento County coroner, Robert Lyons, issued a statement confirming that he died by suicide. And when asked by local reporters about the possibility of 2 gunshot wounds being suicide, he replied, "It's unusual in a suicide case to have 2 shots, but it has been done in the past and is in fact a distinct possibility."
I guess anything's possible. That is just so unlikely.
Yeah, which it makes it seem like this guy investigated or was the coroner for other CIA deaths where they were
yeah, he's oh, it's happened before.
Yeah, I've seen it actually. Widespread internet rumors at the time said that Webb had been killed as retribution for his Dark Alliance series. Webb's ex-wife, Susan Bell, told reporters she believed Webb had died by suicide. She said the way he was acting would be hard for me to believe it was anything but suicide. And she said Webb had been unhappy for some time over his inability to get a job at other major newspapers, and he sold his house the week before his death because he was unable to afford the mortgage.
Sad.
So that's pretty much it. That's the end of the story, really. He wrote this thing about the CIA being involved in drug trafficking, which we know is true. And he died by suicide with 2 gunshots in the back of the head. So,
it's a familiar story.
Yeah. Okay, and that's it. Be safe driving home. Watch over the night, dear. Bye.